Hello and welcome to Arden's webinar series. We're here today with John Davies, who's going to be showing us or giving us a talk through and a walkthrough of his work and pixel art as a profession. My name is Cavallo Trimpton and I'm the program leader at Arden for all of the graphic design courses and in Nyborg. And he's just going to lead us in there. So over to you, John.
Hello, thank you, Cavallo. Hello everyone, so welcome to my presentation. It is on pixel art as a profession, a brief history on pixel art, how it's made and the path to making it full-time. So my name's John Davies, as Cavallo has already mentioned. I am a professional pixel artist. I'm just going to talk a little bit about myself first of all. So I've been doing pixel art for about 17 years now. I work mostly in video games. But in the last 2 or so years, I've been more recently branching out into making artwork for music videos, album covers, and TV shows. The TV shows haven't quite happened yet. That's the big important one I'm working towards right now. It's top secret. I did a study on a Bachelor of Arts Computer Graphics at the Thames Valley University in early 2000s and jumped straight from that into a job doing pixel art. I've worked on various indie games in my time. If you're an indie gamer yourself, you may have heard of some of these games that I've worked on, such as The Binding of Isaac, Cave Story, most recently Inmost, and Super House of Ninjas. But yeah, I've been doing pixel art pretty much my professional life so far. But let's talk about what pixel art is, really. I'm not sure how many of you are big pixel artists yourself or have experience working with pixel art, but we're going to cover like the basics of it to begin with and just go forward as the presentation goes. So hopefully, whether you've dabbled in pixel art before or you have no idea what pixel art is, we'll cover as much of it, so you'll take something away from this. So let's discuss a bit of the tech of pixel art. So pixel art is named because of the pixels used to create it. The pixels are the individual dots on any digital display. So whether it's your TV, your monitor, a phone screen, any like electronic digital display, basically, and the pixel art is drawn on a per pixel basis. So even though the monitor screen nowadays is about 1920 by 1080, you would be working on a much smaller scale. So if we look at the piece I've got here, this is a pixel piece which is 335 pixels wide by 141 pixels high, and I've got a little close zoom in version here, which just shows the individual squares, and this is the magnification level that I would be working at on pixel art pieces like this. So you can see all the different squares there, and that's pretty much what pixel art is. Pixel art is sometimes also known as dot art. It's also sometimes known as 8-bit, but we'll cover a little more exactly what 8-bit is. It's not strictly all pixel art, but 8-bit art is pixel art, but we'll get on to that. Pixel art is very similar in concept to other grid-based creative crafts like mosaics, hammer beads, and cross-stitching. So if you have any experience with any of those creative crafts, you will have a bit of a head start with working on pixel art anyway. Just anything that's grid-based, working with individual colors on the squares, helps you with pixel art in this realm. So we're going to cover briefly a very brief history on pixel art. I'm going to keep it brief because I know it's not everyone's preference when it comes to discussions like this, but because of the origins of pixel art in general being that its foundations are in technical and graphical limitations of computers and video games, I feel it's quite important to discuss why certain things carry forward to pixel art even today, when the tech is far more advanced than what pixel art needs. So pixel art, computer graphics were first started being used in, or experimented with in universities in around the 1950s. However, it was around the 1970s where we started getting actual usage of pixel art and square-based artwork and graphics for displays on games and home entertainment systems. So we've got some very retro games here. We've got Pong on the left, and we have Space Invaders on the right. Two very famous computer games and arcade games from the 1970s. This time period, we also had vector graphics, but that's not strictly pixel art, even though it's displayed on the screen as pixels. The way you draw with vectors for some of the computer games at this time, like Asteroid, if people remember that game, that's just like point-based artwork, so that's not strictly pixel art. But we're just going to talk about the pixel art side of things. So at this time, graphic displays were incredibly limited. We had very, very few colors. I believe graphics were technically created due to a glitch in a display on computers at the time, which led to the development of them producing various colors and such. But people wanted image details and characteristics to be displayed in a functional, clear format with whatever the technology had on offer. We see with the Space Invaders, the iconic designs of the little aliens on the screen. We're not entirely sure what everything exactly is supposed to be, but we can clearly see they are living creatures that are moving downwards towards the screen. That's pretty much the extent of the technology you had at the time. But as computer games became more mainstream and demand for bigger worlds and more interesting characters came as a result, there was more of a push towards doing more with the tech you had at the time. Unfortunately, it wasn't demand kind of exceeded reality for a lot of it. So some of the games at the time were very strange displays. There's an old Atari game called Adventure, just simply called Adventure. In that, you're a character running through a maze being chased by what's supposed to be a dragon. However, the display at the time kind of didn't do it justice, so the dragon ends up looking more like a giant walking duck. If you look at the image today or any footage of the game, you'll just see this giant yellow duck creature running around chasing the player where it's supposed to be a dragon. That was sort of them trying to get to grips on displaying imagery through pixel art. Not quite getting it to begin with, but as time went on with these displays and entertainment systems, there was more of a push towards understanding what works and what doesn't with the tech. So next we're going to talk about a very famous video game. I'm sure most of you have heard of this one. It's called Donkey Kong. So this came out in 1981 in the arcades. It wasn't the first to feature color and animations, but it was one of the first to just push the idea of characters with expressive features towards them. So we actually have, like, this is the promotional artwork for the arcade cabinets at the time, with Donkey Kong and who was known as Jumpman at the time, but we now better know him as Mario. But to try and get those characters working in the confines of the tech, they had to make a couple of compromises. So if we see here a couple of sprites from the game, we have the arcade cabinets at the time could only display 16 pixel by 16 pixel individual parts of what's called a sprite, which is just any moving object on the screen. So for Donkey Kong himself, he needed 6 in total, so a 3x2 of 16 by 16. Not only that, but each individual square could only use a maximum of 4 colors, and the transparent color in the background counts as a color. So realistically, you only had about 3 colors, so flesh, brown, and white here for Donkey Kong's main color palette. But in spite of those limitations, they not only did they make these characters recognizable, but it actually dictated a lot of the design itself. So they kind of worked in reverse on it, which is apparent with Mario himself. So in the design process for when they were creating Mario, this was the only size they had, which was just one 16 by 16 square, which isn't a lot of room, certainly, and especially with just 3 colors plus transparency to work with. So they made improvisations on his design. So when they were drawing the face, they couldn't make the nose stand out from the face in a recognizable way. So to split the nose away from the rest of the face, they drew him a mustache, which is a very iconic feature of the original and still current design of Mario. They couldn't draw the hair properly at the time, so they decided to just get around that by putting a hat on him. That's a red cap to disguise their attempts at drawing hair. And when he was walking around and swinging his arms about, when the arms were red and white or flesh, they kind of got lost in the motion of the game, so they couldn't see the arms properly. So they decided to make the arms blue, and that eventually turned into him wearing dungarees. So it was a lot of compromise and working around constraints even at the time. So that's one of the fundamentals of pixel art, just working with constraints and limitations, which I think is very crucial to making good pixel art. So after this era, which is, by the way, this is what is probably considered 8-bit graphics. So these are 8-bit pixel art pieces. And the next screen, we also have 8-bit. So this is the exact same sort of thing. This is three colors per sprite, plus 1 for the transparency, a limitation of 24 colors on screen. They had to try and make everything work around those limitations, and that dictated a lot of the design elements of these characters and stage elements and so forth. After that, after the 8-bit consoles, which consists of things like the Nintendo Entertainment System, Commodore 64, the Sega Master System, then we moved on to the 16-bit systems, the Super Nintendo, Sega Mega Drive, things like that, which offered a lot more technology. We have a whopping 256 colors available on screen at any one time. We had 16 colors per sprite, as opposed to 4, including the transparency. And the sprites could be much larger than ever before. However, there were still limitations. They still had to have individual palettes for the sprites that couldn't cross over with each other. So if you see here, the giant robot suits have one specific color, and the characters riding them have their own color palettes. That's very much by choice, very much by a design choice, to make sure that they work around the limitations of the hardware at the time. Otherwise, these would be a lot more colorful. If you look at the Mega Man games in future, they get a lot more vibrant with various colors in there. So yeah, there are still limitations even going forward, but the limitations bred creativity and interesting compromises and trying to understand various graphic and artistic staples like contrast, perspective, like focal points, and so on and so forth. But past this point, pixel art games started to get a lot more vibrant and a lot more varied in art styles. So we have everything from child-friendly Yoshi's Island, more like animator-friendly Earthworm Jim. We've got some games that are very varied in style, from the whimsical forest sunny day aesthetics of Legend of Mana to the very dark and gothic horror elements of Castlevania Symphony of the Night, running around a castle slaying vampires and demons. And this came this was possible as the technology improved further, while still holding the fundamentals of creating pixel art around limitations and restraining them. Even with something like Legend of Mana, the sprites have very few colors to them, like 16 altogether, I think, for the individual characters on the screen. And that's what works with them, and it's very tech friendly at the time, and it was aesthetically pleasing for them. So there's a lot of a flourish for the pixel art styles in the golden era of gaming at this time. However, past this point, which was around the late 90s, so around the PlayStation 1, Sega Saturn era, past there, pixel art games kind of fell out of favor once 3D became more mainstream and a lot more 3D technology and mechanics were possible. People moved much more towards creating and purchasing 3D games. So pixel art took pretty much a backseat for quite some time, until we get to the early 2000s. So once we moved past this point, we then moved on to a mini resurgence of pixel art. So if anyone remembers these, not my cup of tea personally, but these were very popular in the early 2000s. These were the referred to as pixel art dolls. So basically they had, this was during what's known as Web 2.0. So when internet forums and communities started happening en masse, and people of various interests were able to find each other more easily, and like cooperate on and collaborate on projects and various art projects and interests and things like that. This is one of those bases of it. It's you get these individual characters, and people would just dress them up basically, but they would dress them up using artwork created via pixel art. And it was very easy at the time because it's a low barrier of entry towards making art for these things. You only needed to put a couple of dots and a few colors, and you've already got like a new top or new shoes or whatever. So there was a lot of interest garnered from pixel art in various things like this. There was also a lot of interest through various web comics at the time, which were using pixel art, basically just sprites ripped directly from the old games and used in place of the characters, with some subtle edits to color and arm position and face expressions and so on and so forth. So one side of it was coming from internet cultures at the time flourishing. The other was a new wave of technology that people could put video games on, particularly mobile phones that existed before smartphones. So the J2MEs, the flip-top phones, the ones with all the buttons that you still had to spend 5 minutes writing a single text on. People would produce games for those. However, the tech was still very limited for those devices. The gamed file sizes were tiny, something like 150 to 300 kilobytes per game. So they needed to find a way to produce graphics that would work for those games without taking too much space and working with limitations. And pixel art is absolutely perfect for that sort of thing. So we had a lot of video games resurfacing that needed people to produce pixel art again on limitations, and working with hardware accessories that could not run other games that were popular at the time. So this was in the early 2000s, and then past there to what we pretty much have today is the current wave of pixel art in various video games nowadays. This is the area where it's much more prolific now than ever before, and it's developed by individual game developers or people with small independent game studios, more commonly referred to as indies. So this is almost entirely a stylistic choice at this point, because this is all running on hardware that does not need these limitations in place. We're running them on modern PCs, on modern games consoles, even on modern phones that would be far surpassing anything of the retro games consoles that needed pixel art games as a requirement. So this is all just adhering to pixel art styles that were prolific at the time, and honoring various tribute to various cherished games and game styles at the time. Basically, it's because pixel art is now retro, and retro is always cool, as the trend usually happens. So yeah, even though there's more capable technology nowadays, the concepts of pixel art being with palette limitations and so forth are still very prolific with pixel art. And you may notice one of these games is not the same as the other. A little known game called Minecraft, I'm sure everyone's heard of it. Even though that is a 3D game, the textures do need to be drawn on limited resolution and with similar style to pixel art. And not only that, but people playing the game very often recreate pixel art sprites from games or other places they find on the internet and recreate them with the blocks in game. So that also stimulated further interest in pixel art as a hobby or style choice or as a profession. So yeah, that's a kind of where pixel art sort of originated from and where it's come to nowadays. So I guess the next thing we need to talk about is how pixel art is made. So we know where it's come from, and the battle between hardware and creativity, making this merging together to create this art style choice today. But how exactly is pixel art really made nowadays? Back in the day, they would have proprietary tools to make their own pixel art pieces, and in fact, you can see some of the original game developers of the 80s taking out full grid paper and drawing the pixels as a concept before transferring them to the PC. The technology at the time was very limited for actually creating the pixel art. Thankfully, we are not limited in any capacity in that regard. So we do have plenty of tools. Now, I will have a list of all of these at the end of the webinar. So if you don't catch all of these at this point, don't worry, we'll get back to it again. So many packages can be used for creating pixel art, thankfully. We have a bunch which are very specifically tailored towards pixel art. So we have graphic scale, which is my personal choice. This is one I use every day for pixel art. In fact, I think I've got it open right now, actually. But you've also got Sprite, which is a very popular one used on Steam, although you can also download it as a standalone title. There's also Pixel Edit and ProMotion. You can also just use Photoshop if you want, or even MS Paint if you wanted to be that hardcore. I'm not a Mac person, unfortunately. I don't know what the equivalent of that is for Macs. I'm sure there is one available, but even if there isn't, there are plenty of programs that are of that caliber for Macs, or you can just use Photoshop. If you prefer to use iPads, I've actually recently started using Pixel Studio Pro for pixel art, and it's very useful. I was actually very surprised on how good it was for pixel art. So if you're more of an iPad user, you can use that. Or there's various ones you can find on your browser. Just go to it on your web browser. You can do these directly from these websites, and they're pretty functionally sound. You can do good pixel art with these. I don't use them too much. I have Piskel there as I use it for teaching primary school kids how to do pixel art using Piskel, and it's very easy to get to grips with it using that. You can make animations with it as well, and export into various image formats for that sort of thing. So you have the tools. So what sort of things do you need to bear in mind when actually making pixel art? Now, I would love to go through every individual tip and trick, but I don't have time for it. We would be here all day for it. So I'm just going to rush through as many of these things as possible. So one of the things I will try and point out, as I've mentioned a bunch of times during this webinar, is the constraints that all pixel art abided by, which I term the rules of pixel art. Now, these are not hard rules nowadays. As I've mentioned, technology has far surpassed pixel art limitations, so you don't really need to stick with these for all of your pixel art. However, if you're making pixel art for the first time, I would recommend sticking to these rules that I'm going to point you towards now. As I've said before, limitations breed creativity when it comes to pixel art. When you've only got a limited number of colors, you have to try and work out what those colors are going to mean, and just like the positioning of the colors can make other colors stand out and be clearer for what they are. So when you're working at this resolution, a single pixel can be anything from a button, a coin, a belt buckle, just like a treasure chest from far away, a whole dragon from really far away, a star system. So you have to sort of, you're working towards making things around the pixel art work towards clarifying what those dots mean. So it's a lot of it is contextual, which is helped with colors as well, I would say. But I'm going to go through these individually anyway, so don't worry about not getting it right now. One of the things I will say you must follow, really, when you're working with pixel art, do not use anything that has a soft edge to it. So anything that's like an airbrush or a blur or smudge tool for pixel art, you don't use it. I do not recommend using anything with a soft edge brush. Anything that generates extra colors, like a blur filter, dodge, sharpen, soften, blur, all those, just I wouldn't recommend it at all. When the pixel art is being post-processed, like if you've got if you want depth of field in a video game and the further pixel art is being blurred, that in itself is fine. But when actually creating the pixel art, I highly insist or very much recommend just sticking with something with a hard edge. If you're using Photoshop, there is the pencil tool, which is perfect for this sort of thing. So that's what I would say is the only hard rule for pixel art. But for the other ones, you've got color limitations, which I've just mentioned. So here's some examples of pixel art using limited colors or a limited palette. So we've got a couple here. This one is 3 colors. That's just red, just black, white, and gray. In spite of that, you can get details like shading and perspective and motion in there, and even some fading with the musical notes flying off the dinosaur's head there. You've also got this one from my friend Nucleos. Go check his work out, it's excellent. Using just 5 colors. This one actually ties in quite well with I keep forgetting the term. Is it CGA or EGA? It's a type of palette that was used for old PC games, which is basically cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, and white as well. And so that's sort of adhering to that sort of palette. And this one over here is I really wanted to make it use 16 colors, but I just couldn't. So this is an example of me breaking my own rules, but I was trying to adhere to just 16 colors for the entire image. And in spite of that, we've got usage of it. We got shadows and other colors being used as the basis for the darker colors of existing ones. So all the dark parts of the fur and the skin are the same color, but because they're next to others of different color, it gives the impression that they are like dark blue, dark yellow, and so forth. That's something you can work with different colors in palettes. So that's something I would recommend trying out when working on pixel art. The other thing I would like to suggest working towards is using low resolutions. As I've mentioned, pixel art was created with low resolution displays, and you had not much room to fit details. However, with the resolutions you had on offer, you can still make a lot work with them. So we got some animations here which are 32 by 32 pixels, and in spite of that, we can get a lot of different colors and variations and cute expressions and motion in them. And this one, which is 17 pixels by 17 pixels in size. Now, this one uses a technique which is often referred to as subpixeling. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go through it in detail, but the short answer for it is that it allows for motions that seem smaller than the pixels allow. If you're going to work with pixel art, I very highly recommend looking into subpixeling. It's not the easiest technique to get to grips with when doing animation, but it produces pretty good results, especially if you're working with small resolutions. We got a lot smoother animations here than would normally be possible if it was working on just the individual pixels moving as they are. One of the other limitation I would suggest trying to work towards is limited animation frames. So at the time of these games, you only had limited storage for all the individual frames of an animation. So they really didn't have enough room for smooth animated characters. So you had to work with like 2 to 3 frames of animation per sprite for something of the 8-bit era. In spite of that, you can get charismatic, charming animations through just simple motions, like the frog here, just being very squishy on the spot, just moving up and down with 2 frames. That's an easy one. We got this one, which is like 3 or 4 frames per action, but because you've got some strong keyframes in it, it does pretty much what you need it to do for the situation. And then we have this one where we've got these individual characters only have 3 or 4 frames of animation per piece. And in spite of that, that's again strong enough keyframes should be enough to illustrate what you need the pixel art to illustrate. So in spite of all these limitations, once you've gotten to grips with it and you've got a bunch of pixel art under your belt and you're feeling pretty good about working with pixel art, I suggest breaking the rules. So once you've gotten to terms with those limitations, you can start being a bit more adventurous with the scope, the size, the fluidity of these animations. So this one's, we've got 76 frames in total for the animation in this one. Whereas with this one, this is a pixel art piece, which is a whopping 800 by 800 pixels in resolution. I do not recommend doing it. 800 by 800, I nearly killed myself doing this pixel art piece. But if you really fancied the challenge, that's certainly an option. So you should be confident in breaking these these self imposed limitations on your pixel art when you're going forward. But when you're starting off, try working towards them. So there's a couple. The other thing I want to talk about is the pixel art creation process. I'm going to rush through this pretty quickly because I've just noticed the time. I'm running a little behind than I was hoping. So I'm just going to rush through a couple of these ideas I implement for creating pixel art. If you're working with very small resolution, you can just draw the pixel art directly onto the image as it is, or you can work from higher resolution images. So for this one, I started with like a painted rough version of it, which has the color and positioning and lighting that I wanted the final piece to have. And then when working on the pixel art version, I dropped a couple of the colors that I like the most from this one, used them in the pixel art version, and then added a few more of my colors and adjusted accordingly to what I wanted them to be. So you can start with like a high resolution version as a reference, or like the base version, and then create a lower resolution pixel art version from it. When I say create, I mean starting from scratch. You don't just draw the pixel art directly on this one. You keep this to the side and then make a pixel art piece here as you're working on it, you use the high resolution one as reference or color detail information. And for if you want to work on animation, so there's a couple of ways to do animation. One of the ways I like to work with is these. So for this one, there was a base keyframe that we started with, and I started with these just pixel pencil roughs, and before starting to draw the keyframes, clean versions, and then adding the in between frames afterwards. So that's another way. That's a way I like to work with more higher res pixel art animation. You start with roughs, you properly produce the keyframes, and then you add the in between frames manually. I'm gonna have to rush ahead a bit, unfortunately. There is tiled art that you can use to create a scene. So these are sort of created with individual squares of pixel art. So you draw one of these squares and then place the squares much like you're tiling a bathroom. They're instances of the same piece of pixel art, which all have the same color limitations and resolution, but you can use them to build larger, more complicated scenes. It's pretty much how levels and environments were created in old games. So once you've got all those, the final thing I'm going to cover is what I like to call cheats, and also cheats, because some of these are not cheating. It's just what, as an artist, you probably should be doing anyway, but they would apply perfectly fine to pixel art. to help speed up the process. So one of those is using 3D for pixel art. Now, I do not recommend making the pixel art in a 3D program because it's not really good for that. And some of the old games like Donkey Kong Country used to make 3D characters and then render them out as sprites to move around an environment, which is known as pre-rendered sprites. That is something that's popular at the time, but I would not recommend that for as making pixel art as is. However, if you're making an environment like this, you can lay out the perspective pieces. So this is my friend Ricardo Jucum. You should look up his pixel arts. They're excellent. He does amazing 3D neon cyberpunk environments. So it starts off with like a perspective piece in 3D, using the building blocks to create like where you want the building to be, and that helps you with perspective and lighting if you wish to do like a base render of the light, this with some basic lighting, and then you use that as reference. You trace over with pixel arts, get rid of the render, and then use the pixel art layer that you've traced with to fill out the rest of the details that you want. If you want to use go this route, then yes, Blender is excellent for this. It's free and it's brilliant. I always recommend Blender if we're doing any kind of 3D. Not that we're talking 3D as pixel art, but you know what I mean. So sort of in that similar frame of mind, you can also just use references for your pixel art. So like I said before, pixel art is still art, so you should be using any references for you that you would for any other type of art. So for this, I took pictures of my hand at the main keyframes of the animation, drew those as pixel art sprites in my pixel art canvas, and then filled in the in-between frames manually. So that definitely helped. Although I probably would have lit my hand properly to get the lighting underneath and the bright lighting from the crystal ball as needed, for better reference for shading. But that is something that you can definitely use for your pixel art. So yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to discuss. Like I said, there's a lot of fundamentals that you can talk about with pixel art. I'm sorry I couldn't talk about all of those today, but there are plenty of resources available for looking up those. There's some excellent tutorials online from people like Saint11, Heg Nyborg, Bandygrass. You've got some further research on these websites. You've got pixel art specific websites like pixeljoint.com. And these are all the apps that were previously mentioned during my talk. But yes, thank you very much for coming to my webinar.
Okay, thank you very much, John. That was a fantastic talk, by the way, and some really remarkable work, really lovely work. I've got a few questions that I want to ask you from kind of like a design kind of like slash breaking the rules, breaking the grid perspective, because it's just a fabulous way to look at what graphic design kind of principles do, and then when you break the grids, applying the principles and still being flexible and kind of like more creative and forward thinking. So something that you touched on was the nuance of having to be restricted and that the limitations create creativity. So where'd you get your inspiration from for these designs?
I mean, the inspiration strikes from anywhere. I mean, if they pretty much, a lot of these are, some of you, if you play video games, you might recognize some of them as being just straight up fan art of the games existing. However, some of them are just anything that inspires me. If you remember the piece I showed earlier of the giant stone woman just with like the islands floating around, that actually came to me in a dream once. I'm completely serious. I had a vision of it, and I was so startled by it. I immediately woke up and had to rush to get my art pad to. I've got it in here somewhere, but I'll find it later. But yeah, I had to rush and jot it down before I forget, because you know, dreams, you always forget them like a minute after you wake up. So.
That's what I was going to say. Would you express, like, for more experiential works, just jotting down every note that you ever think of in a book next to you, next to the bed or something?
Oh, absolutely. I've started getting in the habit nowadays of dedicating a whole afternoon to just finding somewhere I'm comfortable and quiet, and like keeping away from all the, I've gotten in the habit of finding somewhere outside to sit and leaving all my technology at home, not even taking my phone with me or anything, and just taking an art pad and some pencils and drawing what comes to mind. I've had some really excellent ideas definitely doing that.
Yeah, that's a fabulous point, because, sorry, that's one of the things that would generally inspire in graphic design, is that drawing is the foremost criteria that you use, and you do that above anything else. You draw, always draw. So moving on from that, how long do you think one of these tiny little pixel animations takes you broadly? Like the smallest, just one character.
The smallest ones. Well, I work quite quickly because I have to work with a lot of deadlines with existing clients. But some of the ones, like the little chimpanzee, that took about an hour or two. There was a lot of frames of animation in that, to be fair, but something smaller than that would probably take no more than an hour, I would say, sort of thing.
What's the largest kind of like design series that you've worked on that's taken the longest amount of time?
The largest design series, the one I had earlier with the dinosaur walking out of the forest, that
the 800 by 800 pixel one.
The pixel art one. If I can just go back to it, this one.
Yeah, 800 by 800.
Sorry.
I was just referring to the size, the 800 by 800 one.
Yes, the 800 by 800 one. Yes, that took about 3 weeks to do altogether.
I don't think we can see the details in this, like the nuance of how detailed this piece of work really is from this picture, because it's condensed, isn't it, in this format?
Yeah, to be fair, at this point, it's almost not pixel art at that size. Like I said, I don't recommend doing it at that size because it did nearly kill me. But the other one on the left here also took me about 2 weeks, and that was actually from just walking through the forest. I got inspired by that one, just near my house during the autumn. Big surprise, but
something
yeah.
that might be useful to touch on would be how you translate light from frame to frame, because that's a very technical and difficult thing to do generally. I mean, obviously there's like a certain linear kind of like movement of light, but are there any kind of like specific tips that you use as you move the light through space, like from transitioning from cell to cell as you're doing the painting?
Yes. I mean, there's a lot of good tutorials and books written by amazing animators over the years. I particularly recommend a book by Preston Blair, who was one of the old Disney animators that's really taught me well about animation. If you look on, if you go to YouTube and look up a GDC talk from a woman named Muriel Cartwright, she worked on a game called Skullgirls, and that's a really excellent talk on not just animation in general, but on making good snappy animation for pixel art or just anything in general. One of the things that I feel people need to understand is that smooth animation does not necessarily mean good animation. You lose a lot of timing and weight if everything moves at the exact speed throughout the whole world. It's impressive that you got all those frames of animation in, but when everything looks like it's moving underwater, it kind of loses the impact you may go for. So like I said, I would recommend looking up Muriel Cartwright's Skullgirls talk at GDC for extra tips on animating for games.
We'll make a note of that one. How did you transition from a graphic design kind of interactive multimedia background into pixel art? How did you? What was the first job that you got, for example? How did you get into that area?
Actually, they kind of happened independently of one another. The pixel art was a hobby that sort of occurred at the same time. However, a lot of it was the creativity that inspired me to push pixel art further was as a result of the interactive multimedia course I did. I immediately jumped into a job working on the old mobile phones that I discussed earlier, the flip-top button ones with very limited hardware. So it kind of forced me to work with pixel art as a limitation again, even if it's not the same limitations as people who worked on games in the 80s would have worked with. So.
Okay, and if you were to recommend, just a question here, if you were to recommend using pixel art to get into making video games, for example, what would you recommend for that?
So if you want to make, if you want a good jumping into the deep end sort of experience with it, I would recommend game jams. So game jams are a yearly event. There's multiple each year on various corners of the world. There's a global one that happens every year at the end of January. It's basically you have a very limited time, about 48 hours, to create a game from scratch, start to finish in that time period. That's an excellent time because you don't necessarily really have to work clean with pixel art because you don't have enough time to polish everything up. But it's a good way to experiment. It's just a good environment to experiment with working on pixel art things. Outside of that, I would recommend just working on any game making tools. So you've got Unity is like the industry standard for a lot of indie. Did I say indie? I said Unity, right? I might have. Okay, I wasn't sure. So yeah, Unity is industry standard for a lot of indie developers. But you can also use Game Maker Pro, ClipTeam Fusion, or even RPG Maker if you want. People do make games in those and sell them commercially. But all of those are very good. I used RPG Maker when I was much younger to help me make pixel art games. I've moved on from there to to more Unity stuff, but it's certainly a valid way to get into making video games using pixel art. So.
Okay. Just a second. Alexis, do we have any student questions that you want to ask? Alexis?
Sorry, I'm here. Hello. Yeah, we've got a question here from Guy. Who asked, is pixel art something one might specialize in, or is it part of like a wider graphic design skill? He's sort of asking about, you know, in terms of a career, like more of a specialist role versus like more of a general role. Yeah.
You can absolutely be a specialist in pixel art. As with all freelance jobs, you might want to broaden a little further. I have experience with 3D and digital painting as well. I don't use those for my day-to-day work, but they certainly help with elements of the pixel art and game development process as well. So it's just any of those adjacent kind of skills sets that you can develop. I know some people who are just pure pixel artists and nothing else, and then some people who are very talented who can code and draw, and they basically are one-man teams and create amazing indie games on their own, like the guy who created Cave Story. So
yeah, I mean, I agree that freelance art, when you freelance, you have to do a broad spectrum of different projects, but if you can become a specialist in one area, like John has done, then you develop a name for that area, and then you get more work based on your name and your abilities within the area. So it's kind of like a mixed bag, and it depends upon your skills. And visual language and communication is such a broad area in general, and it's so needed across every sector. But it's, I would say, find what you're good at and then do a lot of it. Really loud ringtones. Yeah, so find what you're good at and then repetitively do it, and then get it out there, and so that becomes like your core skill, and then learn things around it that you can add to it and build upon it.
Yeah, that's perfectly put. I very much agree with you on that one, Gavel. So excellent.
Anything else?
I haven't got anything else here. I don't know if there's anything else that someone else might ask.
I was going to ask, do you have any kind of like further tips or recommendations of artists that you may want to, add to the narrative that you've already created?
So there's a couple of, trying to remember the list now. There's so many pixel artists I would highly recommend. So there's a very talented French animator named Kevin Gemin, commonly known as KK Flipnotes, and he does wonderful, very adorable pixel animations, and he just uses his Nintendo DS to animate them, and he uses it professionally too. He animates for various studios and musicians using animations on his DS and 3DS. That's a guy I would recommend looking up. There's also a pixel artist named Ansi True. She is a pixel artist and also does cross-stitching, so you can get an idea of how the two merge together on that one. Who else was I going to recommend? Henk Nyborg, I've mentioned his name before. He's an amazing pixel artist from the old world, so like the Amiga 80s era, who's still active today. His stuff is phenomenal. I would very highly recommend looking into his artwork, definitely. There's so many others. I'll try, if I think of any off the top of my head, I'll make sure to blurt them out just out of nowhere. But yeah.
Thank you for sharing those with us. It's always good to know kind of like additional details. So are there any kind of like further tips that you might have for us in general in relation to pixel art?
Let's see. I'm trying to.
I guess in a way, it's like anything, like developing any kind of like visual style. It's practice makes perfect, but then also developing layering, because there's a lot of like, aside from pixel art, if you're not going to become a pixel art specialist, you develop a layering style and understand lighting, then understand shadows, then understand how to compose it together. You develop a narrative of your own to draw upon, don't you, toolbox.
That's a good point, actually. I know a lot of pixel artists started by working from existing pixel art and just taking it apart. So if you go to Sprite's resource, which is just a depository of all like old school video games and pixel art from them, the sprites, backgrounds and such, you can look at those and look at them in detail and try and understand where they use color, what the lighting, how they produce lighting, various techniques for getting information across in a concise format, merging styles like that. I would recommend having a go and editing some of those if you want. That's a perfectly valid form of understanding pixel art. Of course, don't take credit for any of these edits, but definitely taking a look at other people's existing art and having a tinker around with it yourself is a very good way of understanding pixel art. I mean, I've edited a couple of sprites in my time when I first started out, and that's I was very thankful for that. So I would recommend that though, definitely.
Okay, yeah, I'm just enamored by this artwork on the screen. It must look amazing if you print it out and have it massive on the wall. This look really fantastic. So Alexis, if there are no more questions, just check.
Yep, no, that's all.
Okay.
But yeah, I guess to conclude then, thank you so much, John. Obviously the session was fantastic, very interesting stuff there. I'm a huge fan of KQ Flipnote as well, so that was great to hear that being mentioned too. And of course, all of you in the audience today, this session has been recorded, so will be available sort of on demand once we get it up on the webinars hub a little bit later. And of course, if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to us and we'll try and get you passed on to the right people. But yeah, thank you so much, John and Cavell, and to everyone else, have a wonderful afternoon. I'll speak to you again soon.
Thank you very much, John. It's been fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cavell and Alexis. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody.